You have any ducked up family secrets? Here's mine. Everyone in my family, including myself, is a pathological, compulsive liar. My mother was adopted. She found her biological family later in life. She then extorted them for as much money as possible before they cut all contact with her and by extension me. I have no idea what kind of messed up lies she told about me for sympathy and or more money. She has stolen money from everyone in my family including me. She is an alcoholic. Lying waste of life, and the world will be much better when she finally dies from lung disease, heart and liver failure. She beat me as a child. My grandparents live in the Middle East. They used to have a child slave. Basically an impoverished family sent their then 12-year-old daughter to live with my grandparents to work as a maid. She worked day and night and waited on my grandmother. She was being paid for her work. But not to her personally, but to her parents for safekeeping for when she is older. She didn't go to school and could barely read or write. I never realized how ducked up this was until many years later. I was 6 at the time. I am 21 now. I've spoken out against it to my mother and grandparents now, but this is many years after the fact. And I am told to keep quiet about it because people will misunderstand. So yeah, that's my ducked up family secret. My father was a relentlessly self-improving boulangerie owner from Belgium with low-grade narcolepsy and a penchant for buggery. My mother was a 15-year-old French prostitute named Chloe with webbed feet. My father would womanize. He would drink. He would make outrageous claims like he invented the question mark. Sometimes he would accuse chestnuts of being lazy. The sort of general malaise that only the genius possess and the insane lament. My childhood was typical. Summers in Rangoon. Luge lessons. In the spring we'd make meat helmets. When I was insolent I was placed in a burlap bag and beaten with reeds. Pretty standard really. At the age of 12 I received my first scribe. At the age of 14. As a Rostrian named Vilma ritualistically shaved my testicles. There really is nothing like a shorn scrotum. It's breathtaking. I suggest you try it. Great uncle killed himself after getting the Hispanic maid pregnant. My father's stepdad murdered 5 people in front of him. I had to teach him to write spell read. My dad's a fan of affairs. My sister thinks that talking to my dad after I get home from the hospital about how she wishes I would heal myself to make her life easier is a good idea. Facebook never keeps information. I covered my father's porn addiction to people I know by claiming it was mine, and I was interested in sex and sexuality. I sold in-game currencies to Asian guild sellers to help my mom out of debt. She doesn't even know this in its entirety. My mother slept with the man who had been raping molesting me for the past year and a half. The worst part about it was that she knew what he was doing. And slept with the guy anyway. Duck you, Mom. My cousin committed a multiple murder of a couple with a rifle in front of their baby. Then he stole their car. Life in prison. My mom kept it from me until I was older. Obviously. Also, not really a secret. But my grandma swears that her brother had an affair with the girl on the Sun-Made Raisins box. I don't have any proof for you. But I believe her. I looked it up and she's a real person who lived where he was living while he was in the army, Fresno, and there's a few appropriately aged kids with his and my last name living in the area. My last name is not common at all. Not proud of the first one. Proud of the second. I slept on an old dog bed stuffed with wigs. I watched a prostitute stab a clown. Our basketball hoop was a ribcage. A ribcage. Some guy with dreads electrocuted my fish. I seen a blind guy bite a police horse. A puppy committed suicide after he saw our bathroom. I once bit into a burrito and there was a child's shoe in it. I seen a hooker eat a tire. A pack of wild dogs took over and successfully ran a Wendy's. The sewer people stole my skateboard. The projects I lived in was named after Zachary Taylor. Generally considered to be one of the worst presidents of all time. I once saw a baby give another baby a tattoo. They were very drunk. Like any family, mine's got some shit. But I think the most screwed up thing was how my sister treated me when we were younger. She used to duck with me. Psychologically. I was like 5. And she would suddenly start acting different. And telling me that I wasn't real. That I had died during an accident years ago. That our parents were dead and I hadn't been able to cope with it, so I just imagined they were still alive. As an incredibly impressionable youngster, these sessions always drove me to tears. And always occurred when my parents would be out for most of the night, leaving me alone in the house with her for hours on end. Once I got older and understood she was just a rig, she stopped. I don't think there were any long-term effects from it. But I can still remember one time when she just stared at me with these cold unfeeling eyes and told me I wasn't real. I felt sick and just started sobbing. And she just kept starting at me. As I cried, she turned out the light in my room and locked me in, telling me to think about what she told me. Well, this isn't so incesty. Found out at 18 that my mom is an illegitimate child. My maternal grandfather is not biologically related. For years I would look at my yearbook pictures and find it puzzling that in most photos I looked exactly like this kid in my class. The resemblance was uncanny. Turned out that he was my illegitimate half-uncle. My grandmother let that secret slip once when she was drunk. She'll never admit to it while my grandfather is still alive. My dad recently told me about my uncle and his wife. They met in their early 20s. Their kids all pretty much look a lot like him. However, my dad mentioned something I didn't know. His wife once dated a, now deceased, cousin of mine. He was in his mid-teens and she was in her early 20s when it happened. My family all spent a lot of time at my grandparents at this time. And my uncle and his wife lived with her as well when they just got married. My dad says one time my grandma was doing laundry and heard something in the basement. She goes in and sees her new daughter-in-law in bed with said cousin. My uncle never found out. My dad claims a few people in the family have speculated that my cousin was the father of their first son. Hard to tell though, cause they all look alike. The cousin I mentioned has his own sad story. I mentioned he's deceased. He died in a car crash after drinking at a party 2 weeks after turning 22. His car crashed, rolled, and he and his friend died instantly. Don't let your friends drink and drive, guys. My aunt, his mom, is a nurse who teaches at a trade school. A former student of hers told us that my aunt has a different story about how he died. She says he was a paramedic who died on the job killed by a drunk driver. It's sad. I believe it. She kind went into a deep 3-year depression after his death that really messed up their family. Her second oldest is in jail. Her other 2 kids have issues as well. My cousin was a good guy. He had problems, always getting into trouble. And he was changing his bad ways at the time. But it's sad that his mom doesn't want to deal with the truth. Sadly, his dad died some months later. He was diabetic. Cousin's death just took a toll on him. And our grandpa passed that winter too. But at least my grandpa lived a long life. TLDR, aliens anally probed my ancestors. Edit, second paragraph. My secret. Wife cheated on me. I want to be noble. Say I forgive her. Stay with her. Work at successful company. Shares vest in 5 years. If everything goes well, I'll be worth millions then. Strong possibility. Buy my way out. Provide for children and her. Dropped her like a bad habit. In the meantime, pretend that everything is cool. I'm okay with doing the rightest thing for me. It's the most gentlemanly thing to do for a trifling whore. And more than she deserves. But in the interests of the kids. Don't care that I don't care about her anymore. I was diddle-doodled a lot as a little girl and my mom won't believe it. I thought the title said have you dug up any family secrets and was expecting stories of people accidentally revealing them at a big dinner in front of everyone. My great-great-great-grandmother was a cleaner at the Swedish king's mansion and had an affair with him. I am of royal blood and I'm not allowed to tell anyone. My family is either ducking boring or very good at keeping secrets. My dad spent over $100,000 on escorts during the last 5 years of his 35-year marriage, ended in divorce. Half of the escorts were transsexuals in various stages of male to female transition. He wrote online reviews of many of the escorts. I've read all of them. My dad's side of the family is ducking crazy. They're all from Poland and I've never met any of these people. The grandfather guy head of the family had a fake leg and he used to smuggle money into Poland when it was a communist country and desperately poor. The government found out about this and executed him in a public square. He would smuggle the cash in his wooden leg. He had money because he was living in America and owned a farm. But what he would do is go to Poland and find young men and convince them that he'll pay their way to America. They give him basically everything they have. He lets them live at his farm. They work for him until their debt is paid off. Kind of like indentured servitude. But what he used to do was murder these men after some time when they thought their debt was paid. He would do it with a cane that had a brass knob. Just blindside them and bludgeon them to death. Then have my father and uncle dig graves and bury the bodies. Then he would just go back to Poland and find more people. Rinse and repeat. I don't know whatever happened of it all. But this all happened in the 40s. Edit. Also my mother's side of the family were all Nazis. Both her parents were in Hitler youth camps from childhood and then they served as nurses or fought or did whatever for the Nazi party. There is a strong sentiment of racism with all of them. The older ones that is. Mainly due to the fact that they were indoctrinated with racist shit from childhood in Nazi summer camps. Not my family. Best friend's family. Lived with them for a while after leaving home during HS. Mom, J, had been an illegal immigrant who came over with nothing to her name. Worked 2 jobs under the table to send money home to the family. She meets dad, S. They marry, he's happy. She's not. Once she has her citizenship she works 2 jobs above board to pay for their son. Saves up $50K over the years as an nest egg for his college education. S has a midlife crisis and leaves his family to go to Hollywood to make it as an actor. Begs J for forgiveness and she forgives. Because Jesus. He cheats on her a few times for good measure. I think the guy is ducking scum. The mom's something of a saint. Best friend did end up going to college. To put a happy spin on it. Welcome to the small town soap opera behind my middle name. My middle name is David. I was named after my father's mentor. My mother later had an affair with my father's mentor. I have no idea if this happened before or after my parents' divorce. David was definitely still married though. My mother later married an entirely new guy. My stepdad had an affair with the mother of one of my classmates. During my junior year in high school. My mom and stepdad got divorced. My stepdad married that woman. That woman is David's daughter. Oh. And David and my father? Both ministers. Edited, because David is more common. Ups sheet is whack. Just a bunch of sexually deviant weirdos. My stepmother murdered a guy. Cut off his pen 15 and left him in the woods. We're so far back in the countryside, deep woods, that police who were friendly with her were more or less able to not notice it happened. My father spent most of the 70s and 80s helping cops get rid of murder weapons they didn't want a prosecution on by trading the cops weed up. And then selling the gums to a certain motorcycle gang. My dad, who has a wife, travels back to Vietnam and meets with madam about potential fun. Women send photos of themselves asking my dad to marry them. I found out by fooling around his computer and noticed a Yahoo Messenger conversation still open. He has no idea I know this. The day before we left for Vietnam for our vacation, my dad told me to tell everyone I was his sister. And that he was not married or has ever been married. Every time he gets a call, he tells his friend he's with a client. He buys flowers, candy, women clothing. And says it's for a family friend. As I board the plane, cause I was flying out a week earlier than him, I hear him on the phone saying my client is heading back to the US. And I brought you gifts. Can't wait to see you. DR my dad is a big pimpin' with mad hoes in Vietnam. My dad is a former transvestite. My dad beat up my brother when he was young. He also has beat my mother. My mother feels that this wasn't really physical abuse. My dad once attempted to strangle me. My parents hate each other. My father was great for 6 years by his childhood therapist. My half-brother attempted suicide twice as a teenager. My half-brother's dad visited him in the hospital after an attempt and informed him that he wanted nothing to do with him. Soon after was the second attempt. My father's family hates my mother. My 2 uncles murdered my mom's last boyfriend. This was back in 2000. He had been molesting and raping me for 2 years, ages 7-9. My mom eventually found out and kicked him out of the house. But on the way out he stole every penny in her bank account, her car and any of our belongings that were worth anything. Uncles found him living in a motel down the street, so they kidnapped him, threatened him, beat him unconscious and buried him alive in a field 3-4 hours away. My great-grandfather shot my great-grandmother in the head in front of my infant grandmother and her older sister. For years we were told it's stranger that walked in and did it, with no reason behind it happening. No one told us the truth until my grandmother and her sister died. My family is, all of a sudden, sane and picturesque. One time I left the Atari on and it burned an image of asteroids into the television screen and my father yelled at me. My uncle was a very high up sannyasi for the Hare Krishna. As a result, he spent 30+ years living in India. He would do tons of charitable work and, even though we have different religious views, I respect him immensely for all the good he did in the world. He passed away around 6 or 7 years ago and, in his will, he left over $9,000 to one of his favorite underfunded schools in India. My aunt, his sister, was named one of the co-executors of his will. The other executor was one of his disciples. After his death, she forged the signature of his disciple, withdrew the $9,000 and used it on a holiday for herself, my grandmother, and my cousin. They stayed at 5-star hotels and went out every night. The kids in India went without anything. It disgusts me. This is my worst. A second cousin of mine was a twin, but the second baby was born a stillborn. Her parents were very open with her about this. This woman, however, was psychotic. One day, on the bus, she was convinced that she saw her twin. She told her entire family that they were wrong, that her brother was alive and well, but had obviously been adopted. She continued to see her twin on the bus and struck up conversation with him a few times. They ended up dating. That's right. A woman and who she thought was her dead twin began dating. A few months later, they break up, only for her to discover that, oh no, she is pregnant with her dead twin's child. The pregnancy went on until she went in to discover the sex of the baby. I honestly don't know how they didn't catch it sooner. But it turns out that this baby was not real. She had had a false pregnancy. She had thought she was pregnant so hard that her body acted like she was pregnant. Pregnant with her dead twin's baby. My family doesn't like to talk about it.